The blades of her garden shears gleamed in the dying afternoon light, a cruel silver grin in the suburban twilight. Snip! And just like that, the reassuring hum of my generator died. The sound wasn't just cut off, it felt like it was murdered. One moment, I was an island of civilization in a sea of darkness. The next, I was plunged back into the Stone Age with the rest of my neighbors, all because of Brenda and her reign of horticultural terror. A profound silence fell over my house, a silence far deeper and more offensive than the neighborhood-wide blackout we were currently experiencing. The heroic glow of my desk lamp vanished. The life-sustaining hum of my refrigerator sighed its last breath. My Wi-Fi router, my beautiful, glorious portal to the civilized world, blinked once and gave up the ghost. I stood there in the sudden gloom, the silhouette of a half-eaten turkey sandwich in my hand, and felt a rage so pure, so potent, it could have probably powered the block for a week on its own. Brenda had finally gone too far, and she was about to learn a very important lesson. You don't bring garden shears to an electrical engineering fight. Let's rewind. 2 hours earlier, my life was, for lack of a better word, normal. Annoyingly normal. I was on a Zoom call, a particularly soul-crushing one, involving a client who thought synergizing our vertical assets was a meaningful phrase. I was a freelance tech consultant, which is a fancy way of saying I explain to people in suits why their billion-dollar ideas are technically impossible without making them feel stupid. It's a delicate art. I'd quit my high-stress job as an actual electrical engineer to escape the corporate grind, only to find the grind had followed me home, just with better coffee and no mandatory team-building exercises. I was in the middle of nodding thoughtfully while mentally calculating how many episodes of a new sci-fi show I could binge after this call when my world went black. Not metaphorically, literally. My 3 monitors, my pride and joy, blinked off in unison. The little green light on my webcam died. The face of the suit-wearing gentleman I was placating vanished into the digital ether. The house fell silent. A quick glance out the window confirmed it wasn't just me. The entire street, Oak Haven Estates, a name far too grand for our cookie-cutter slice of suburbia, was dead. Now, a normal person might have panicked. They might have sighed, lit a candle, and resigned themselves to reading a book by flashlight. I am not a normal person. A slow smile spread across my face. This was not a catastrophe. This was not an inconvenience. This was my Super Bowl. You see, I'm a prepper. Not the tinfoil hat, bunker in the backyard kind. I'm a practical prepper. My philosophy is simple. Modern life is fragile, balanced on a knife's edge of functioning infrastructure. When that knife dulls, you damn well better have your own sharpener. I strode to the garage with the purpose of a surgeon heading into the OR. I flicked on my headlamp, its beam cutting through the gloom and landing on the centerpiece of my collection, a Westinghouse WGN 7500 DFC dual-fuel portable generator. 8,000 running watts of pure, unadulterated freedom. It sat there, gleaming, a monument to foresight. Beside it, perfectly coiled and color-coded, were my heavy-gauge extension cords. My fuel cans were full, treated with stabilizer, and arranged with the precision of a military honor guard. Some guys have classic cars they polish on weekends. I have the ability to watch 4K Blu-rays and run a microwave during a citywide emergency. We all have our priorities, and mine are climate-controlled and Wi-Fi enabled. I talked to myself as I worked, a habit I picked up after going freelance. It keeps the crazy at bay. Or maybe it invites it in for a drink. The jury's still out. "All right, gorgeous," I murmured, patting the generator's fuel tank. "Time to shine." The setup was a practiced ballet. I rolled the beast to the far edge of my driveway, a safe distance from any windows. I checked the oil. I connected the propane tank. Cleaner burning, less fuss. I ran the main 30-amp cord to the transfer switch input I'd installed myself last year, a project Brenda had tried to fine me for, citing an unapproved exterior electrical modification. A fight I'd won with a glorious 14-page rebuttal citing city code. A second, smaller cord ran directly to my home office, a little fail-safe for my server rack. With everything in place, I flicked the switch, pressed the auto-start button, and she roared to life. It was a deep, throaty, reassuring hum. The sound of victory. Back inside, the house awoke. The fridge kicked on with a happy shudder. My monitors blinked back to life. My server rack spun up its fans. I went to the kitchen, pulled a still ice-cold beer from the fridge, and raised the bottle to my reflection in the darkened window. Outside, the world was a black, silent void. Inside, I was king of my own electric castle. That's when I heard the knock. It wasn't a friendly, "Hey neighbor, got any spare batteries?" knock. It was a sharp, percussive, 3-rap burst that could only mean one thing. Brenda. I opened the door to find her standing there, a vision in beige. She wore a polo shirt with the ostentatious Oak Haven Estates HOA crest embroidered over her heart. In her hand, she clutched her weapon of choice, a clipboard. To Brenda, that clipboard was Excalibur, the Constitution, and the Holy Bible all rolled into one. It gave her power. It gave her purpose. "Alex," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of saccharine sweetness that usually precedes a cyanide capsule. "Brenda," I replied, taking a deliberate sip of my beer. "Dark out, isn't it?" "It is," she said, her eyes flicking past me to the warm glow of the lamp in my hallway. "Which is why it's so unfortunate that you're in violation of the community's covenants, conditions, and restrictions." I sighed. Here we go. "And which of the 1,000 commandments have I broken this time, O great lawgiver?" She tapped a perfectly manicured finger on her clipboard. "Noise Ordinance 17B. It explicitly prohibits non-essential sustained mechanical noise after sunset. Your machine," she said the word like it was a cockroach she'd found in her soup, "is quite disruptive to the auditory tranquility of our community." I looked up at the sky. The sun had dipped below the horizon, but there was still plenty of light left. "First," I said, holding up a finger, "the sun hasn't fully set. We're in civil twilight, Brenda, look it up. Second, in what universe is electricity non-essential? My food, Brenda, it's in the process of not becoming a petri dish of botulism. I'd call that pretty damn essential." Her smile didn't waver, but it got tighter. It was a marvel of facial engineering. "The rules are the rules, Alex. They exist to protect property values and ensure a harmonious living environment for everyone." Harmonious is one thing, Brenda. Sitting in the dark eating canned beans is another. It's a blackout. A little mechanical noise is the price of admission to the 21st century. "A copy of the violation notice will be in your mailbox," she declared, as if she were Martin Luther nailing his theses to the church door. "It outlines the infraction and the associated fine. You have 10 minutes to achieve compliance." She didn't wait for a response. She just turned, her sensible shoes making crisp authoritarian sounds on the pavement, and marched back to her own dark, silent, and apparently harmonious home. I watched her go, shook my head, and closed the door. 10 minutes. Right. I had a turkey sandwich to build and a streaming queue to attend to. She could mail her violation notice. I'd file it in the appropriate circular receptacle under my desk. The first bite of the sandwich was glorious. Perfectly chilled turkey, crisp lettuce, a generous smear of mayo, all courtesy of my foresight and a properly functioning refrigeration cycle. I was just admiring my handiwork when a flash of movement outside my kitchen window caught my eye. I put the sandwich down and crept to the blinds, peering through a slat like a spy in a cheap thriller. And there she was, Brenda, marching across her lawn onto my driveway with a grim determination I'd only ever seen in nature documentaries about wolverines. And in her hand she held a large, gleaming pair of garden shears. My brain took a moment to process the scene. It just didn't compute. Brenda, the woman who once tried to fine me because my recycling bin was a shade of blue inconsistent with the approved palette, was now walking toward my generator like a slasher movie villain. I sprinted for the door, my mind screaming, "She wouldn't! She wouldn't!" I fumbled with the deadbolt, my fingers suddenly clumsy. I threw the door open, shouting her name. But I was too late. I was framed in the doorway, a helpless observer to the desecration of my masterpiece. She stood over the thick, black 30-amp cord, the main artery connecting my castle to its beating heart. She raised the shears. They glinted, catching the last rays of light. Snip. The sound was shockingly small, a dull metallic bite, but its effect was apocalyptic. The mighty roar of the WGN 7500 DFC choked, sputtered, and died. Silence. The light over my head went out. The comforting hum from the kitchen ceased. The world, both inside and out, was now uniformly dark and quiet. I stood there, sandwich forgotten, a witness to the murder. Brenda looked at the severed ends of the cable, then looked at me, a flicker of triumphant madness in her eyes. She straightened her polo shirt, turned, and walked away, leaving the shears on the ground next to her victim like a calling card. For a full minute, I didn't move. I just stared at the dead generator, the severed cord lying on the concrete like a slain serpent. The rage came on slowly. Then, all at once, a tidal wave of incandescent fury. It was a very specific kind of anger. It wasn't just that she'd cut my power. It was the violation. She had trespassed. She had destroyed my property. She had attacked my competence, my self-reliance, my very identity as the guy who is prepared for this exact scenario. This wasn't about a noise complaint anymore. This was war. I walked back inside, navigating the dark house by memory. My mind was a whirlwind. I went through the 5 stages of grief in about 90 seconds flat. Denial. This can't be happening. Anger. I am going to burn her prize-winning petunias to the ground. Bargaining. Okay, universe, if you magically fix this, I'll be nicer to my clients. Depression. My ice cream is melting. And then as I stood in the blackness of my garage, a new stage emerged. A glorious, terrible, magnificent 6th stage. Inspiration. My first thought was simple. I could fix the cable. I had the tools, the know-how. I could strip the wires, splice them together, wrap them in a mountain of electrical tape. It would be ugly, but it would work. But as I stood there, the idea felt small, insufficient. A Band-Aid on a bullet wound. Fixing my own power would put me back in my castle, yes, but it wouldn't solve the fundamental problem. The problem was Brenda. The problem was an entire neighborhood held hostage by her petty tyranny and the slow, grinding incompetence of the power company, which I knew wouldn't show up for at least 24 hours. My eyes scanned the garage. My gaze fell upon a hook on the wall. Hanging from it was a bright, obnoxious, neon yellow safety vest. I'd bought it years ago for a roadside emergency kit I was putting together. Next to it, on a shelf, was a metal clipboard from a DIY cabinetry project, and tucked away in a dusty corner, a white hard hat I'd bought for a home inspection and never worn again. The pieces started clicking into place in my head, forming a beautiful, terrifying mosaic of an idea. I had the knowledge. I was a goddamn electrical engineer, for crying out loud. I knew how our local grid was laid out. I knew about feeder lines and transformers and junction boxes. I knew that the problem was likely a single, localized blowout that could be bypassed if you knew what you were doing. I just lacked one thing: authority. And in suburbia, authority isn't about what you know. It's about what you look like you know. It's about the vest. It's about the hard hat. It's about the clipboard. 4 minutes after Brenda had slashed my cables, a new man was born in the darkness of my garage. I slipped on the vest. It smelled faintly of stale trunk air and old plastic. I put on the hard hat. It felt absurd. I grabbed the clipboard. I strode to my home office where my label maker, bless its battery-powered heart, was still operational. I typed carefully, City of Oak Haven, Dept of Public Works. I printed the label and affixed it to the top of the clipboard. I went to the hall mirror and looked at myself. The man staring back was a caricature, a Halloween costume of a municipal worker. He looked ridiculous and he looked perfect. It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about justice. It was about competence. It wasn't impersonation, I told myself, my voice a low, conspiratorial whisper in the dark house. It's not impersonation if you're more competent than the real guys. It's a civic duty. It's proactive community improvement. I, Alex, the freelance tech consultant, was gone. In his place stood Inspector Sterling. And Inspector Sterling had a job to do. A very, very illegal job. I took a deep breath, opened my front door, and strode out into the night. The street was eerily quiet. The only light came from the moon and the scattered beams of flashlights dancing in windows. It was the perfect stage. I walked with a new gait, a purposeful stride I'd seen 1,000 times on construction sites, head up, shoulders back, radiating an aura of weary competence. My first objective: establish credibility. I walked to the middle of the street, pulled out my phone, which had a precious 68% battery left, and pretended to have a very important, very technical conversation. "Yeah, Phil, it's Sterling," I said to my blank screen. "Looks like a classic G7 transformer blowout on the Elm Street feeder. The whole sector is dark." No, don't bother sending the main crew. The substation fire has them tied up. I'll handle the localized bypass myself. Just get ready to re-energize the grid on my go-ahead." I saw a curtain twitch in a nearby window. Good. The seeds were being planted. I started my inspection, walking the curb, occasionally stopping to stare up at a utility pole, shaking my head gravely, and making a meaningless scribble on a blank page on my clipboard. I was the master of security theater. That's when I saw my neighbor, Doug. He was on his front lawn waving a feeble flashlight at his breaker box, a look of profound confusion on his face. Doug is a good guy, a software salesman who thinks hard reset is the solution to every technical problem from a frozen laptop to a clogged garbage disposal. He was the perfect first subject. "Evening," I said, my voice an octave lower than usual. Doug jumped, startled. "Oh, hey, Alex. Man, this is crazy, right? The whole block is out. I was just checking my breakers." I gave his breaker box a dismissive glance. "That's not your problem, son. The issue is upstream." I tapped my clipboard. "Sterling, City Inspector. We've got a cascade failure in the secondary distribution grid. It's a real mess." Doug's eyes went wide. The transformation was instantaneous. I wasn't Alex, his slightly nerdy neighbor, anymore. I was an official, a man with answers. "A city inspector? Wow, right here? So, what's the plan? Are we going to be out all night?" He looked at me with the hopeful eyes of a lost puppy. This was my moment. Time to lay it on thick. "The official ETA is 24 to 48 hours, I said, letting the horrible number hang in the air. Doug visibly deflated. "But," I continued, leaning in conspiratorially, "the city has authorized me to attempt a localized field repair, a bypass. It's tricky and it's dangerous, but it might just get you people back online before midnight." "Wow," Doug breathed. "Really?" "But I need to access the primary junction box," I said, pointing vaguely toward the back of his property. "It's behind your prize-winning rose bushes there. I need to ensure a safe clearance zone before I bring in the heavy equipment." "Heavy equipment?" Doug's eyes practically sparkled. "Of course," I said gravely. "Can't reroute a 200-volt line without it. Now, could you do me a favor? I need that plastic flamingo moved at least 10 feet to the west. It's in the potential arc flash radius." Doug didn't hesitate. He practically dove for the pink plastic bird, moving it with the reverence of a bomb disposal technician. "Is this far enough, Inspector?" "Perfect," I said, making another note on my clipboard. "You're a good man, Doug. A real help." He puffed out his chest. "Whatever you need, Inspector, just say the word." I had him, my first disciple. He stood by my side, holding his flashlight beam steady for me as I inspected his sprinkler system. He felt important. He felt involved. And more importantly, from across the street, Mrs. Gable was watching. And behind her, Mr. Henderson was peering through his blinds. The legend of Inspector Sterling was beginning to spread. The city was slow, faceless, and incompetent. But here, on their street, was a man of action. A man with a clipboard. A man who was doing something. In the dark, desperate suburbs, that was enough to make you a king. I was surveying the curb in front of Brenda's house, making a point to scowl at her perfectly manicured lawn, when I heard it. The low rumble of a diesel engine. The squeak of heavy-duty suspension. Headlights cut through the darkness, sweeping across the houses. A large white utility truck, emblazoned with the logo Apex Power and Light, rolled slowly down the street and came to a stop. My heart hammered in my chest. This was it. The real cavalry had arrived. My little game was over. But then I looked closer. Apex wasn't the main city utility. They were third-party contractors, the kind of guys the city calls for low-priority jobs or overflow work. My brain, running on pure adrenaline and rage, saw an opportunity. Not a threat, but an asset. The driver's side door opened, and a man hopped out. He was built like a vending machine, and had a face that looked like it had been chiseled from granite and disapproval. He wore a stained hard hat, and a look of profound annoyance. This was a man who had been called away from his dinner for what his dispatch probably told him was a simple check and report. This was Gus, and I had to get to him before he got to his radio. I strode toward him, clipboard held high like a scepter. I intercepted him before he'd taken 3 steps. "Took you long enough," I barked, all business. Gus stopped, blinked. "Excuse me, who the hell are you?" His voice was gravelly, laced with suspicion. I got right in his face, violating his personal space with the confidence of a man who signs paychecks. "Sterling, City Public Works. I'm the field commander for this sector. I've been on site for almost an hour. Where have you been?" Gus squinted at me. His BS detector was world-class. I could tell. It was screaming. "Field commander? Nobody told me about a field commander. My work order just says investigate a localized outage at Oak Haven Estates." "Your work order is an hour old," I snapped, gesturing wildly at the dark houses around us. "Does this look localized to you? The J7 feeder hub blew a transformer. It took out the whole block. The city's primary crews are tied up with a substation fire over on the industrial side. It's a mess. They delegated localized field command to me to get things moving. Are we clear? I was just throwing words out there. J7 feeder hub, substation fire, it was all glorious, magnificent nonsense. But it was specific nonsense. Gus was still skeptical. "Delegated command? To a guy I've never seen before? I'm supposed to call this in." He reached for the radio on his shoulder. My blood ran cold. This was the make or break moment. I had one card left to play. Righteous indignation. "You want to call it in?" I said, my voice dripping with scorn. "Go ahead. You'll sit on hold for 45 minutes while the dispatch operator tries to figure out who I am. Then they'll spend another hour trying to get a supervisor on the line. Meanwhile," I pointed dramatically to a dark house down the street, "Mrs. Gable in number 42 has an oxygen machine running on a battery backup that's got about 2 hours of life left. And Mr. Henderson in 38 is diabetic, and his insulin is sitting in a refrigerator that is slowly turning into a warm box of poison. So you can stand here and argue about protocol and paperwork, or you can get your crew out of that truck and help me bypass the fried transformer before this situation goes from a major inconvenience to a legitimate medical emergency. Your call, Foreman." I had no idea if Mrs. Gable used an oxygen machine or if Mr. Henderson was diabetic. But in that moment, I believed it with every fiber of my being. Gus stared at me. I stared back, not blinking. I channeled every ounce of authority from every condescending boss I'd ever had. I could feel Doug watching us from his lawn, a silent hype man. Finally, Gus let out a long, weary sigh. The fight went out of him. He was a man of action, and the logic, however false, was undeniable. Paperwork versus people. He dropped his hand from his radio. "Fine," he grumbled. "What do you need?" A wave of relief so powerful it almost made my knees buckle washed over me. I had done it. I had bluffed a pro. "I need you and your men," I said, my voice steady, betraying none of the seismic celebration happening in my chest. "And I need every high amperage fuse and every foot of bypass cable you've got in that truck." I, Inspector Sterling, now had an army. My new army consisted of Gus and 2 younger guys, Ricky and Sal, who seemed perfectly happy to be told what to do by anyone other than Gus. With the authority of a seasoned director, I led them to the large green utility box on the common lawn, strategically located directly in front of Brenda's house. "All right, pop it open," I commanded. "Let's see what we're dealing with." Gus grunted and produced a specialized key. The metal door swung open, revealing a dizzying spaghetti monster of thick cables, bus bars, and switches. To the uninitiated, it was chaos. To an ex-electrical engineer, it was a beautiful, solvable puzzle. "Just as I thought," I said, pointing at a scorch-marked terminal. "The primary feed from the pole transformer is fried. We're going to have to isolate this loop and create a temporary parallel circuit from the secondary grid on Chestnut Avenue." Gus peered into the box. "Bypass to Chestnut? That's a long run, and it's going to mean digging up the common area." A wicked little smile touched his lips. "The HOA is going to love that." "The HOA," I said loudly, for the benefit of any listening ears, "has no jurisdiction over a declared public utility emergency." As if on cue, Brenda's front door opened. She emerged, not with a frantic energy, but with a cold, calculated calm. She had her clipboard. This was it. The duel of the petty tyrants. She marched up to our perimeter, which at this point consisted of a few orange cones Ricky had placed around the open box. "Excuse me," she said, her voice like ice. "Inspector." She practically spat the word. "I am Brenda Jansen, the duly elected president of the Oak Haven Estates Homeowners Association. I require to see your city credentials, your work order number, and the relevant municipal permits for this unauthorized excavation on HOA common property." I didn't even look at her. I kept my eyes fixed on the wiring, my brow furrowed in deep concentration. I was a busy man with important work to do. "Ma'am," I said, my voice tired but firm, "this is an active emergency repair site. All local statutes and residential covenants are superseded by Municipal Public Safety Directive 1138B. Please stand back at least 15 feet. You are in the contamination zone. Ricky, who was holding a shovel, looked at me, then at the pristine grass. Contamination zone? He muttered. I shot him a look. Yes, Ricky, I said, my voice carrying across the lawn. Potential for polychlorinated biphenyl leakage from the damaged transformer casing. Highly toxic. We need to maintain a secure perimeter. Safety first. That was the magic word. PCBs. It sounded terrifying. It sounded official. It sounded like something that could lead to a lawsuit. Brenda stopped dead in her tracks. Her bureaucratic brain couldn't compute. On one hand, I was violating her sacred turf. On the other hand, I had invoked the holy trinity of liability, safety, toxins, and official-sounding directives. She was momentarily paralyzed by the conflict in her own internal rulebook. She gave me a long, hard stare. She knew. She didn't know how she knew, but her finely honed Karen senses were tingling. Something was deeply wrong here. That inspector. He looked an awful lot like that smug jerk from number 34. Defeated for the moment by a threat she couldn't see, she made a tactical retreat. She spun on her heel and marched back to her house, but this time she had her phone out. She was dialing. The clock was ticking. I had won the battle, but Brenda was escalating to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. We worked with a frantic energy. Gus, now a believer in my mad crusade, or at least enjoying the novelty of it, directed Ricky and Sal with brutal efficiency. They dug a shallow trench for the bypass cable. I, meanwhile, was directing the technical side, calling out wire gauges and terminal connections. We were a well-oiled machine, a band of brothers united against the darkness. Then I saw it. The slow, inexorable sweep of red and blue lights painting the houses at the end of the street. A police cruiser. My stomach did a triple backflip with a twist. This was it. The real, actual law. Not the pretend law of HOA bylaws, but the kind with handcuffs and holding cells. Game over. Gus and his crew saw it too. They stopped working instantly. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me, their expressions a mixture of, uh-oh, and you better have a plan. I took a deep breath. Stay in character. You are Inspector Sterling. You belong here. The cruiser pulled up silently. The doors opened and 2 officers emerged. One was young, with a fresh-out-of-the-academy haircut and an earnest, serious expression. The other was older, in his 50s, with the weary, slumped posture of a man who had seen it all and was deeply unimpressed by this latest chapter. The young one, Officer Miller, strode up to me. "Sir, we received a call about a disturbance. Some kind of unauthorized utility work. Can you tell me who you are and what exactly is going on here?" His hand was resting casually on his belt, near his sidearm. My mouth went dry. "Inspector Sterling," I managed, my voice a little higher than I wanted. "City Public Works, coordinating an emergency bypass of the J7 feeder hub. As you can see, officer, the entire block is without power." The older cop, Sergeant Davies, ambled over. He didn't look at me. He looked at the open utility box, the trench dug in the lawn, Gus and his crew frozen like statues. Then his tired eyes finally landed on me. "Sterling, huh?" he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Never heard of you." It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. My entire charade was balanced on a pinhead. I usually handle industrial zoning permits," I stammered, thinking fast. "They pulled me into residential fieldwork for this crisis. It's an all-hands-on-deck situation down at the main office." Officer Miller was not convinced. "I'm going to need to see some official city identification, Inspector Sterling." This was the end. My wallet contained my driver's license, which proudly identified me as Alex, resident of 34 Oakhaven Way, not Sterling heroic city employee. I started to pat my pockets in a show of fumbling for a wallet I had no intention of producing. "I must have left it in my truck when I was grabbing the schematics," Just as Miller was about to press the issue, a new player entered the scene. Mr. Henderson, the quiet, elderly man from number 38, shuffled out of the darkness, a cardigan draped over his shoulders. "Officers, thank goodness you're here," he said, his voice trembling with what I thought was fear, but quickly realized was righteous indignation. "This man," he pointed at me, "Inspector Sterling, he's a hero. He's been working for over an hour to get our power back on. It's her you should be talking to." He pointed a shaky finger directly at Brenda's house. Brenda was standing on her porch, watching the scene unfold with a smug, vindicated look on her face. "That woman, Brenda Jansen, has been harassing him, trying to stop the repairs," Mr. Henderson continued, his voice growing stronger. "She's a menace. The things she's done, I have binders full of her abuses, illegal fines, unwarranted citations." The Great Gnome Alignment Incident of 2023. Sergeant Davies looked from the earnest Mr. Henderson to the fuming Brenda, then to me, the fake inspector, then to Gus, the real contractor who was just nodding along slowly. He took in the entire tableau of suburban madness. I could practically see the gears turning in his head, calculating the sheer volume of paperwork a full investigation would generate. He was a man staring at a mountain of bureaucratic misery, and he was looking for the easiest path down. He let out a long, suffering sigh. "Miller," he said to his young partner, "looks like a standard utility job to me. The city's probably got their wires crossed with all the outages. Let's not get in the way of these gentlemen." Miller looked confused. "But Sarge, his ID." Davies shot him a look that could curdle milk. "The man is trying to get the lights on. Let him. Our job is to keep the peace, not audit the Public Works Department." He turned his gaze back to me. His eyes were laser sharp. He knew. Oh, he absolutely knew I was full of it. But he also knew that arresting me would cause more problems than letting me continue. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod. A silent, unholy alliance was formed between us. "Inspector," Davies said, the title hanging in the air with a pound of irony. "Try to keep the contamination zone contained. And do me a favor. Get these lights on before my shift ends. I'd like to have my coffee hot for once tonight." With that, he turned, guided his bewildered partner back to the cruiser, and they drove away, leaving a trail of flashing lights and my jaw on the floor. I had bluffed the law, and won. Gus stared at me, a new look in his eyes. It was a look of pure, unadulterated respect, maybe even a little fear. "Okay, Inspector," he said, a grin spreading across his face. "Let's get to work." The departure of the police had a profound effect on our little operation. It had legitimized me. I was no longer just some guy in a vest. I was the guy the cops had deferred to. I was untouchable. The neighbors who had been peeking from their windows now started to emerge onto their lawns, a silent, hopeful audience. But I knew this luck was a finite resource. Brenda was undoubtedly on the phone, trying to climb the bureaucratic ladder to find someone, anyone, who would listen to her. The real Apex Power dispatch might eventually try to contact Gus's truck. Time was running out. "Let's move, people!" I shouted, trying to sound like a seasoned foreman. "I want this bypass connected and energized in the next 30 minutes. We worked with a feverish intensity. Sal and Ricky finished the trench. Gus and I were in the utility box, our hands moving in a delicate dance of stripping wires and tightening terminals. The plan was sound. The execution was flawless. We were at the final step, connecting the main bypass cable to the distribution hub. That's when Gus grunted. It wasn't a grunt of effort, it was a grunt of frustration. "What is it?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "Damn it," he muttered, pulling his hand back. He held up a small ceramic object. It was a high amperage fuse, the kind designed to handle the massive load of an entire block. And it was blown. A thin, black scorch mark ran down its side. "The surge from the transformer must have fried it," Gus said, disgust in his voice. "This is a 200-amp cartridge fuse, specialized. We don't carry these on the truck. We'd have to get one from the main depot." The main depot, which was miles away and probably in chaos. It was a death sentence for our mission. We were so close. To fail now because of a single stupid 2-inch piece of ceramic and wire, it was unthinkable. The neighbors murmured, sensing the shift in momentum. Despair began to creep back into the air. My mind raced. A 200-amp fuse. Where could I get one at 9 p.m. in the middle of a blackout? Nowhere. It was impossible. Then my eyes drifted from the utility box, across the lawn, to my own dark house, to my garage, to the magnificent, silent, murdered machine sitting on my driveway. My generator. I had read the technical manual for that generator cover to cover, the way other people read novels. I knew its specs, its tolerances, its every component. And I knew that deep inside its control panel, protecting the alternator from overload, was a main circuit breaker, a heavy-duty 200-amp breaker. It wasn't a fuse, but it would do the same job. It was the same principle. It would work. But it would mean surgery. It would mean cannibalizing my own beautiful, expensive, beloved generator, the very symbol of my self-reliance. I looked at the hopeful faces of my neighbors. I saw Doug giving me a thumbs up of encouragement. I saw Mr. Henderson watching with quiet intensity. I saw Gus looking at me, waiting for his inspector to pull one last rabbit out of his hat. I was no longer just Alex trying to get his Wi-Fi back. I was Inspector Sterling, and the inspector had a duty to his public. A grim smile touched my lips. "Gus," I said, my voice filled with a new resolve. "Get me a socket wrench, a Phillips head screwdriver, and your best pair of insulated wire cutters. I have a donor." Gus looked confused for a second, then followed my gaze to the dead generator. His eyes widened in understanding. "Boss," he said, a new respect dawning in his voice. "Are you sure?" "The needs of the many, Gus," I said dramatically, striding toward my garage. The neighbors watched in confused silence as I began to operate on my own generator. With the focused precision of a bomb disposal expert, I removed the control panel cover. There it was, the main breaker, nestled amongst the wiring. It was perfect. I carefully disconnected it, snipping the wires and unbolting it from its housing. It felt like I was performing an organ transplant on my own child. I held the breaker up. It was heavy, solid. It was hope. Doug, who had crept closer, watched the procedure with open-mouthed awe. He's giving his own generator," he whispered to another neighbor. "For us." I was no longer just an inspector. I was a martyr, a saint of the suburbs. It was a heavy burden, but I wore it with style. I walked back to the utility box and presented the breaker to Gus like it was the Holy Grail. "Here's your fuse," I said. "Now let's bring this baby home." Retrofitting the breaker into the fuse housing was a masterwork of improvisation. It was ugly, involving a scary amount of electrical tape and a few muttered prayers, but it was solid. The final connection was made. The bypass was complete. A hush fell over the entire street. Everyone was out of their houses now, a silent army of bathrobe-clad spectators, their faces lit by phone screens and flashlights. The air was thick with anticipation. It was the bottom of the ninth, bases loaded. Gus stood before the open utility box. His hand hovered over the main switch, a large black lever that would, in theory, channel electricity from Chestnut Avenue and bring our little corner of the world back to life. He looked at me, waiting for the signal. This was my moment of triumph, my magnum opus. And that's when it all went to hell. A car came screaming down the street, its tires protesting as it swerved to a halt just feet from our work area. It wasn't a police car. It was a sensible, dark blue sedan, a manager's car. The passenger door flew open and out stormed Brenda, but this time she wasn't alone. The driver's side door opened, and a harried-looking man in a wrinkled suit and loosened tie got out. He had the pale, indoor complexion of a lifelong bureaucrat who had been rudely pulled away from his evening news. Brenda's face was a mask of pure, vindictive triumph. She had done it. She had reached the final boss. "Stop!" she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Stop right there! This man is a fraud! He's not an inspector! His name is Alex, and he lives in that house! Arrest him!" The man in the suit looked around, bewildered by the scene. The open utility box, the trench in the lawn, the crowd of silent neighbors, and me, a grease-stained lunatic in a high-vis vest and a hard hat. "What in the world is going on here?" the man demanded, his voice cracking with stress. "Who are you?" This was it, the final bluff. I looked the man in the suit dead in the eye. I didn't flinch. I was Inspector Sterling to the bitter end. "Inspector Sterling, City Public Works," I said, my voice booming with righteous authority. And for the last hour, thanks to the constant bureaucratic obstruction from this woman, I jabbed a thumb toward Brenda, this entire block has been without power, endangering the health and safety of its residents. Now, if you and this hysterical citizen will excuse me, my crew is about to complete the emergency reroute. I held the city manager's gaze for a heartbeat, then turned to Gus. I didn't shout, I didn't plead. I gave a simple, clear order. The order of a commander who has absolute faith in his men. "Gus, light him up!" Brenda screamed, "No!" The city manager yelled, "Wait!" But Gus didn't listen to them. He listened to his inspector. He grabbed the heavy black lever with both hands and threw it down with a solid, definitive clunk. For a split second, nothing happened. The silence was absolute. My heart stopped. Did I miscalculate? Did I just blow the grid for 2 streets instead of 1? Then, a single porch light flickered on at Mr. Henderson's house. Then another at Doug's. Then, like a wave, lights blinked on up and down the street. Windows glowed warm and yellow. Streetlights hummed back to life. My own house lit up like a Christmas tree. A collective gasp swept through the crowd, followed by an explosion of sound. It was a roar, a full-throated cheer of victory and relief. People were clapping, hugging, shouting my fake name. "Sterling! Sterling!" Doug was openly weeping, holding his wife. Gus's crew, Ricky and Sal, were doing a little victory dance. I stood there, in the middle of it all, the unlikely hero of Oak Haven Estates. I had done it. It was the stupidest, most reckless, most glorious thing I had ever done in my life. The city manager, whose name I later learned was Ron, stood there utterly gobsmacked. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. He was caught in an impossible political trap. In front of him stood a crowd of his own happy, cheering taxpayers. Next to him was a city-contracted utility crew who had just successfully completed a major repair. And at the center of it all was me, the folk hero of the hour. Arresting me would be a public relations disaster of epic proportions. City manager arrests hero who restored power while bureaucrats slept. The headlines wrote themselves. He looked at Brenda, whose face had collapsed in utter defeat. Her moment of triumph had been stolen and turned into a public humiliation. He looked at the cheering crowd. He looked back at me. He made a decision. He walked over to me, getting close. His voice a low, urgent murmur that only I could hear over the celebration. "I don't know who the hell you are, Inspector Sterling," he hissed, "and I don't want to know. But in about 5 minutes, my office is going to receive a backdated emergency field authorization for Apex Power and Light, retroactive to 4 hours ago, and in about a week, the city is going to mail a Mr. Alex. What's your last name? Just Alex, I said, a little stunned. Ah, a Mr. Alex, he continued. A very significant fine for unauthorized modification of municipal equipment. You will pay it. You will not contest it. And we will never, ever speak of this again. Am I understood? I just nodded, speechless. Ron straightened his tie and turned to address the crowd. But first he looked at Brenda, his voice now loud and clear for all to hear. Ma'am, he said, his tone dripping with official disappointment. I have multiple witnesses, including city contractors, who will attest that you actively interfered with a critical emergency repair. We'll be in touch with your HOA's legal counsel. The crowd went silent. Then a few people started to clap. Brenda looked like she might faint. Her reign was over. Ron gave a weak, political smile to the crowd, got in his car, and drove away, leaving me in the warm glow of my illegal handiwork. The aftermath was glorious. Brenda sold her house and moved away less than 2 months later. The HOA was completely restructured, led by a reluctant but fair-minded Mr. Henderson. The great gnome alignment incident files were finally made public at a community meeting, to much laughter. A week after the blackout, I received an official-looking envelope from the city. Inside was a bill for $5,000. I paid it online that same day with a massive grin on my face. It was the best money I'd ever spent. 2 days after that, there was a knock on my door. It was Doug and Mr. Henderson. They handed me a thick envelope. Inside was $5,000 in cash and a gift certificate for a brand new, top-of-the-line 12,000-watt generator. There was a card, signed by nearly every family on the block. All it said was, "Thank you, Inspector." I'm back in my home office now, typing this story out. The power is on. My new generator sits pristine and untested in the garage, a silent monument to the absurdity of that night. Every now and then, I look out the window and see Doug give me a slow, reverent nod from his yard. It's a little weird, but I'll take it. I just got an email notification. It's from the new HOA board. The subject line is, New HOA Bylaw Proposal. I clicked it open. The document contained a single sentence. Bylaw #1. Don't be like Brenda. They never built a statue in my honor. They didn't give me a key to the city. But sometimes, on a stormy night when the lights flicker, my phone buzzes. It'll be a text from Doug or one of the other neighbors. The message is always the same. You there, Inspector? Just checking? And I smile, lean back in my chair, and type the same reply every time. Don't worry, Sterling is always on duty.